I'm 32. I was just the guy who kept the schedules and filed the reports invisible by design, exactly the way I liked it. Then my boss called me at 12:07 in the morning, and when I got to her house, the front door was open, and she was standing in the middle of her living room, barefoot on marble, looking like someone had quietly taken everything from her. The perfume she wore hit me before she spoke, wood smoke and something softer underneath, and she looked at me the way she never did at the office, like I was actually there. She said, "You're the only one I could think of." Her husband was upstairs asleep 2 weeks later when she told me she wanted things that weren't available to her, and I told her some of them might be. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments, because I still don't know if what we did was wrong. I used to think I was the kind of person nothing interesting ever happened to, not in a sad way, just accurate. I went to work, I came home, I made dinner from whatever was in the fridge. My alarm went off at 6:47 every morning, not 6:45, not 7 o'clock to 6:47, because some part of me needed that specific logic to feel like my life had structure. Administrative coordinator at Halle & Partners, a mid-sized consulting firm where everything was polished and nothing was personal. My job was to keep things moving quietly. Schedules, reports, logistics, the kind of work that disappears when it's done right. I was good at disappearing. That particular Thursday night I had leftover pasta. I ate it standing at the counter. There was a basketball game on that I wasn't really watching. I was in bed by 10, reading 3 pages of a book I still haven't finished, and almost asleep when my phone lit up. 12:07 a.m. Victoria Halle. I stared at it for 3 full seconds. Victoria Halle was not someone who called at midnight. She sent emails, concise, well-punctuated, no unnecessary warmth. She spoke in meetings, like she'd already decided the outcome. She wore heels that echoed in hallways before she arrived, so you always knew she was coming. I answered on the 4th ring. "Daniel?" Just that. Just my name. But the way she said it was different, softer, like she wasn't sure it would still work. "Ms. Halle." A pause. Not a professional one, a real one. "Are you awake?" Something in the texture of her voice stopped me from laughing. The armor was off. Whatever she carried between her shoulders every day at the office. She'd set it down, and this was what was underneath. "Yeah," I said. "I'm awake. I need you to come over." She gave me the address. I hadn't asked questions either time. "I'll be there," I said. She hung up first. I sat on the edge of my bed in the quiet of that. My heart was moving faster than the situation quite explained. I told myself it was reasonable concern. I told myself whatever I was feeling was practical. Then I grabbed my keys. The streets were nearly empty at that hour. I drove with the radio off. My own thoughts were loud enough. I kept coming back to one thing. She could have called anyone. She had a husband. She had colleagues with more seniority. She had Evelyn. I'd seen them together at company events. The comfortable shorthand of old friendship. She'd called me. The guilt came quietly. Somewhere around the 3rd traffic light. A married woman. Your boss. Midnight and you grabbed your keys, without a second thought. But there had been something in her voice. Not strategy, the opposite of strategy. Someone who'd run out of other options and landed on my name. I didn't know if that should worry me or move me. It moved me. Her neighborhood announced itself gradually. Streets got wider. Houses pulled back from the road like they wanted privacy. Her house was at the end of a curved driveway, 3 stories of clean lines. Most windows dark. One light burned on the ground floor, low and warm through sheer curtains. The front door was not fully closed. I stepped inside and called her name. The entry hall was high-ceilinged, marble-floored, a staircase curving upward with the quiet confidence of old money. She was in the living room, standing near the window, arms loose at her sides, wearing dark trousers and a soft cream shirt, simple, effortless, the way wealthy people make simple things look. And her feet were bare, on the marble. That's the detail that got me. Her feet, bare. Victoria Halle, whose heels I'd learned to recognize from 20 feet away, standing still, barefoot. Looking at nothing, she turned when she heard me. Her face did something complicated. Relief and embarrassment arriving at the same time. Unsure which should go first. "You came?" she said. I said I would. "I know." I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. The lamplight caught her face differently than office fluorescence did. She was beautiful in the way photographs don't fully capture. Not exceptional in any single feature, but everything assembled with a precision that takes years to arrive at. The kind of face that gets more interesting as it gets older. But tonight there was something around her eyes. Something tired she hadn't managed to cover, or hadn't tried to. "I'm sorry," she said. "This was irregular. You don't have to apologize." "I think I probably do." She stood awkwardly in the center of her own living room. I'd never seen her awkward before. It was almost impossible to reconcile with the woman who ran boardroom presentations without glancing once at her notes. "Can I ask if you're all right?" She looked at me for a long moment. "I didn't want to be alone," she said. No elaboration, like that was enough truth for one night. I didn't push. "Okay," I said. She blinked. Okay. Something shifted in her. Not visibly, nothing you could point to, but I felt it. Like a room that had been holding its breath finally letting go. We ended up in the kitchen without deciding to. She filled a glass of water and forgot she'd filled it. I stood across the marble island from her, under soft overhead light, while the refrigerator hummed and the garden outside was dark and still. "How long have you worked for me?" she asked. 2 years? Almost 2.5? She nodded like the math surprised her. "You've never pushed," she said. "Most people in your position are always angling for something. You just do your work." "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." A pause? "Yes." She turned her water glass slowly on the counter. "Richard is away," she said. Not an excuse, just a fact laid on the table. I nodded. "He travels a lot." "Which is fine." We both knew what we were choosing. She looked at the glass. "I just sometimes think there's a version of this that doesn't feel quite so arranged." She stopped, like she'd said more than she meant to. "You can say what you want to say." I told her, "Doesn't leave this room." She looked at me carefully, measuring something. Then something in her relaxed. Not visibly, but I could feel it. "I know," she said. "But that's why I called you." We talked for a while about nothing important, and somehow that felt like the most important thing. She asked about my apartment. I told her about the 4th floor and the window and the leftover pasta. She smiled at the pasta. She told me about this house, how she'd chosen it in 6 minutes because the morning light was exactly right, and Richard had thought that was too fast. "Was it?" I asked. "No," she said. "Some things you know." When the clock edged past 2, I stood to leave. She walked me to the door. We stood at the threshold and neither of us moved immediately. "Don't mention this at work," she said. "I won't." She nodded. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Ms. Hollet." The door closed. I stood on the stone step in the dark, listening to the click of the latch. Then I walked to my car and sat in it for a full minute before I started the engine. My chest felt strange. Full, in a way it hadn't been in a long time. Like something had moved in quietly while I wasn't watching, and I wasn't sure yet whether I wanted it there. The next morning she walked into the office at 8:52. Heels, briefcase, hair perfect. Composure assembled and locked so completely that if I hadn't stood in her kitchen a few hours earlier, I'd have had no proof it happened. She walked past my desk without looking up. I spent the morning reading the same paragraph in a report over and over, and finishing it without knowing what it said. Around 11, Lena stopped by my desk. Lena noticed everything and said, "Little." She set a folder down that didn't need to be there. "You look tired," she said. "Didn't sleep great." She held my gaze half a second longer than casual conversation required. Then she smiled and walked away with the folder. Later, Marcus Doyle made a slow pass through the open plan area. He stopped near my workstation. "Big project coming up," he said. "Victoria will probably restructure the teams. Good time to make yourself visible." I looked at him. "I appreciate the advice." He nodded once and moved on. I filed it under things not to think about and went back to my report. That night, I sat in my apartment and waited for something I told myself I wasn't waiting for. At 10:14, my phone buzzed. "Are you awake?" I looked at it for a moment. 3 words. Nothing dangerous about 3 words. "Yeah," I wrote back. "Just sitting." A minute later, she called. "I didn't want to impose again," she said. "You're not imposing?" A small sound, not quite a laugh. "You're very consistent, Daniel." We talked for nearly 2 hours. She asked what I had for dinner. I said pasta again. She said, "You have a pasta problem?" And I laughed in a way that surprised me with its openness. She told me about a documentary on migratory birds, how they navigate by magnetic fields, find north without being taught. "I find that comforting," she said. "The idea that you can find your way without a map." "Or a plan," I said. "Yes, quieter. Or a plan." She talked about an early version of herself I didn't recognize from the office. A girl who'd wanted to study art history but chose economics because it was practical. Who'd been ambitious not because money mattered, but because ambition was a language she could speak fluently. "I'm good at things that matter to other people," she said. No bitterness, just fact. "What matters to you?" A long pause. "Conversations like this one," she said, very quietly. Neither of us spoke for a moment. "I should let you sleep," she said finally. "I'm not tired, I know, but I should let you anyway." It became a pattern before either of us named it. Not every night she was too careful, for every night, but often enough that I started setting my phone face up on the table when I got home, and I stopped pretending I wasn't waiting. She called and asked me to come over again. Richard was away. She said it like a fact, not an excuse. I drove to her house. The porch light was on this time. She opened the door before I knocked. Cardigan, dark trousers, bare feet. The house smelled like something warm from the kitchen. Ginger, maybe? Piano music, low in the living room, she said. "You notice things. I've watched you. You pay attention in a way most people don't anymore." "It's a habit," I said. "No, it's a quality. There's a difference." She was close, not inappropriately, but close enough that I could smell her perfume. Wood smoke and something lighter underneath. We were talking. She was telling me about a meal she'd had alone, in a city she'd loved, how she'd preferred it to any dinner she'd shared that year, when her hand moved slightly and her fingers grazed the back of mine on the armrest between us. She stopped talking. We both looked at it, her hand still close, mine not having moved. Neither of us pulled away, not right away. The moment lasted maybe 4 seconds, which is a very long time when you're not breathing. Then she resumed talking, just slightly quieter. I listened. Neither of us mentioned it, but the air in the room was different after that. We were still sitting like that, close, careful, both pretending at a casualness we didn't feel when headlights swept across the front windows. She went still, I knew, from the change in her body, before she said anything. As Richard's car, some lines aren't crossed, was quietly redrawn. I moved fast. She didn't have to tell me twice. Anything that said someone was here who shouldn't have been? Back door, she said quietly. Her voice was steady. Steadier than mine would have been. I walked quickly through the kitchen, past the marble island where we'd stood that first night, and out through a side door that opened onto a stone path along the garden edge. I pulled it shut behind me without letting it slam. The night air was cold. I stood against the outer wall for a moment, heart loud in my chest, listening. Headlights swept the front. A car door. The soft sound of the front entrance opening. I moved along the path, around the side of the house, through a gate that opened onto the driveway's far edge. My car was parked just past the bend, far enough that it wouldn't be the first thing headlights found. I got in, started the engine quietly, pulled out slowly. No hurry in my movements, even though everything inside me was moving fast. I didn't look back at the house. I drove home. I sat in my parking spot for a long time before going upstairs. The next morning, she walked past my desk without looking up. Same heels, same composure, same forward intention. But this time, I understood the performance differently. I understood what it cost. She didn't look at me once that whole day. Not once. And I watched, not obsessively, not in a way anyone would have noticed, but I watched. Because I was trying to read something in her, some signal about whether last night had ended us or just paused us. There was nothing to read. She was perfect. Controlled. Completely sealed. And somehow that was worse than coldness would have been. Days passed. No calls, no texts, no "Are you awake at 10 p.m.? The silence had weight. It settled into my apartment in the evenings, the same way her voice used to filling the same space, just differently. I kept my phone face up out of habit. Then one night, I flipped it face down, because waiting for something to light up had started to feel embarrassing. Marcus made another slow pass through my area that week. Said something vague about restructuring again. I nodded in the right places. Lena brought me coffee once without asking if I wanted it, which meant she'd noticed something she wasn't naming. I was professional, I was quiet, I did my work well, and at night I sat with the particular loneliness of having had something and not being able to say what it was. Not an affair. Not a friendship exactly. Something without a clean name that had felt cleaner than most named things I'd known. I replayed things the way she laughed at the pasta. I knew what I was doing. I knew it wasn't healthy. I did it anyway. On a Tuesday, 11 days after Richard's headlights swept through the living room window, my phone lit up. Her name. I looked at it. It rang once. Twice. I let it ring a third time. And then I set it down. I sat in the silence of that. The phone stopped glowing. The apartment went back to its normal dim quiet. I'd expected relief, maybe, or clarity. What I felt instead was heavier. Like I'd made the right choice and the right choice had nothing comfortable in it. I sat there for probably 20 minutes. Then I got up, found my keys, and drove. I didn't call ahead. I don't know why. Or maybe I do and it's just difficult to say. I needed to know if the door was the kind that opened or the kind that stayed closed. I needed to know that, without the buffer of a phone call that she could control. Her street was quiet. The driveway curved the same way it always had. The porch light was on. I sat in the car and looked at it for a moment. It's that single warm light in the dark, patient, somehow, like it had been on for a while. I got out and walked to the door. I knocked. There was a pause, not long, maybe 6 or 7 seconds, and then the door opened. She was there. Same soft clothes, same bare feet. Her expression moved through several things very quickly and landed somewhere. That wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite relief, but contained both. She stepped back from the door. I walked in. We didn't explain ourselves. Neither of us offered a reason for the silence or a justification for this. We just moved to the living room and sat, and the absence of explanation felt like its own kind of honesty. She was the one who finally spoke. I was afraid you wouldn't come back, she said. Sybil direct? I almost didn't. She looked at her hands. I know. I heard it. When you didn't answer? She paused. It was fair. It wasn't about fair. Then what was it about? I thought about it. The real answer, not the easy one. It was about knowing what I was doing, I said. before I kept doing it. She was quiet for a long time. "And do you?" she asked. "Know what you're doing?" "No," I said, "but I came anyway." She looked at me then, a long, unguarded look, the kind she almost never gave, the kind that cost her something. And I understood in that moment what it meant to be actually seen by someone who sees very little by choice. It was not comfortable. It was not small. "I don't have an answer for any of this," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for one." She nodded slowly, and something in her settled. We sat together for the rest of that evening in a way that was hard to describe. Close, but careful. Present, but restrained. We talked about small things, and some things that weren't small at all. The music was on again. The lamps made everything amber. At one point she said, "You could have gone anywhere tonight. Done anything. And you drove here." "Yes," I said. Well, I looked at the far wall for a second, because the porch light was on. She turned her face away slightly. But not before I saw what it did to her expression. The calls continued. Not every night. Still never daily. But regular enough to become something I organized my evenings loosely around. Something I stopped pretending I wasn't waiting for. She never asked me to leave my life for hers. Never suggested anything beyond what already existed between us. These conversations, this specific quality of being known by someone who kept you carefully within the one space you were allowed to occupy. Some nights the wanting in it was almost unbearable. Not for anything physical, or not only that, for more than that. For the version of things where she was not someone else's, where the gap between her world and mine didn't require constant, quiet navigation, where I could have said something true and not waited first. I never said it. Neither did she. That restraint was its own kind of intimacy. We were both choosing, every time, to hold the line. And the hold in the conscious, daily choosing not to take the thing fully, that was the most honest thing about it. It was the part that told me it mattered. There was one night, late, months into it, where the restraint nearly didn't hold. We'd been talking for a while. She'd had a glass of wine, which was unusual. She was more open than normal, or the edges of her were softer, and she'd said something funny about herself, genuinely self-deprecating in a way she almost never was. And I'd laughed and she'd laughed, and when the laughter settled, we were looking at each other in the quiet that followed. She reached out and touched my face, very lightly, just the tips of her fingers against my jaw, and she looked at me for a long moment. Then she lowered her hand. "I can't," she said. "I know. It's not." She stopped. Started again. "It's not that I don't." I know I said again. She looked away. Her fingers folded in her lap. "This is the most alive I've felt in years," she said, very quietly, like the admission cost her something. "That's a terrible thing to realize." "I don't think it's terrible." "No," she looked at me. "I think it's honest," I said. She held that for a while. We sat there for another hour. Close, careful, in the complicated warmth of wanting something and choosing not to take it, which is its own kind of love. Unnamed, unclaimable, but real. I still work at Holly & Partners. Life at the office is what it has always been. Reports, schedules, the professional geometry of people who know things about each other that can't be mentioned in meetings. Lena still notices things and says little. Marcus still moves through rooms like a man looking for leverage. Richard Hull still travels and still returns and still stands at company functions with his firm handshake and the right things to say. And Victoria Hull still walks past my desk with heels that announce her arrival. But sometimes, not always, not predictably, she glances over as she pays. Not long, not in a way anyone would log or record or make anything of. Just a glance. The specific kind that contains, compressed inside it, everything we've never said and all the nights that existed in the space between midnight and morning. I keep my phone face up in the evenings. She never asked me to stay. I never asked her to choose. We never said the words that would have required us to answer for what we'd built in the dark. But some nights when the city is doing its low, ambient hum and my apartment is quiet, and the way I used to find comfortable, the phone lights up, and I reach for it before the second ring. 'Cause some doors, once opened, don't go back to being walls. We just learn to stand in them carefully. She never asked me to stay, and I never asked her to choose. But somehow, we kept opening that same door. Some lines aren't crossed, it's just quietly redrawn.